Theme Thursday. It's your boy JT in the basement, in the dungeon, right in front of the cool brick fireplace. Alright, not the point. The point is, we are still rolling through the temple and how, I'm going to recap real quick. The temple is a foreshadowing of God here on earth in the Old Testament. There was multiple steps that went through the temple to get to the holies of holies, which got you into the presence of God. Now again, only the high priest, so Aaron and his descendants, his sons, were able to go in to the holy place and then into the holies of holies. Us peasants weren't allowed in there. But that's why it's so cool. Like I said, God tore the veil which separated us from him, and now we are all allowed to enter into the presence of God. And how sweet is that? Because prior we couldn't get there. We couldn't get to God because we were such sinners. But because of what Jesus did on the cross, no longer does God see our sin, he sees the Son, so we are able to walk into his presence. Not only are we welcome, we're wanted there, and that is so sweet. So today we're we've gone through the gates of Thanksgiving, the altar sacrifice, and now we're parking it at the pool of reflection. Because you just finished sacrificing, you gotta kind of rinse yourself off before you get into the holy place. But this is a time of reflection, a time to remind yourself of how faithful God has been in your life. So when you look ahead, you can see that he's able, because man, he's proved his faithfulness, and now you know of his ableness. That's not a word, but it sounded better than able. So here's how it works. Man, a lot throughout the Old Testament, God's always told him to stop. Stop now, build a pillar. Build a pillar of remembrance. So they would do that. They would anoint rocks. And then, Jacob made Bethel. And there was other places where they just built these pillars of remembrance. Why do we do that? Man, because we're human beings who forget. The Israelites are proof of that. Throughout the wilderness, they kept forgetting how faithful God had been. And so you see the book of Judges and how they had turned from God because they forgot of his faithfulness. They forgot God. And so often we lose our first love, which is Jesus. Because life happens and you forget to reflect on God, and then a bill comes and you get anxious and you get stressed because you forget God. Man, God's in it. God's able. And so before in the temple, before they got to God, he said, hey, before you enter my presence, remind your flesh of who I am. Remind your flesh of what I've done, because we often forget about it, and our anxiousness and and all this stress, we push God off the throne, and we just sit and stare at all our stresses and all our anxieties. And God says, hey, no, remember me. Remember what I've done. Remember what I'm capable of. And in doing that, man, it makes your heart's affection stirred for Jesus, because you see how good he's been in your life. And so, as a practice, next time you sit down for prayer, I want you to walk through the temple. Start by thanking God. And then start by reflecting on your life and how you need to sacrifice some of those things and those struggles that you deal with. And then look back on your life and remember all the good things God's done for you. All the ways he has just moved mountains. He's just provided in the wilderness. Ultimately, man, he saved you from the penalty of sin, which is death. And that right there is one good reason to reflect on God's goodness. But there's been other areas in your life where he might have provided for you, or he's just answered crazy prayers. And do those things before you sit there and pray. Reminding your flesh of God's goodness, because oftentimes we forget. That's why God wants us to remember. And that's a great way to kill the flesh and to feed the spirit.